So I want to address an issue in this video which is, I believe, pretty topical, especially given the anger over the Ferguson case and the Eric Garner case. But this isn't specifically about the police. In fact, it is not specifically about anything. It's an abstract idea I want to talk about, but I just think it's relevant to those cases as well. And the subject is anger management in a civil society. I'll try and describe this as best as I can to try and get what I'm talking about. There's no society on earth that is absolutely fair, and the United States certainly has plenty of injustices. So does the United Kingdom, and so does every country on earth. So to me it seems a logical question: where should all of this anger be vacuumed? This anger that is brought about by injustice, or unfairness, or cruelty, or anything that causes human indignation. Now I can relate to this because, honestly speaking, I don't regard myself as an angry person, but I do regard myself as probably getting more angry more often than the average person, if there is any sort of ratio. My anger is mostly at basically injustice in the world. Now this is not something I think about all the time, but I do reflect on it quite a lot. And truthfully, sometimes I feel so angry that I do seriously want to physically hurt somebody. But I've no history of violence. I've no criminal record. I've never attacked anybody physically. Never. But I think these feelings are very normal. I think many people get them quite regularly, and you just need to look at some of the arguments online to see that there's real anger behind those comments. And what I want to address is that there is a very thin line between thinking about something and doing it. In other words, I might see somebody, could be an individual, it could be a public figure, it could be a particular person whose behaviour I detest, because I think that behaviour is hurting other people. I'll try and give some examples. Jeremy Kyle is a TV presenter in the United Kingdom. He presents a talk show. In fact, my American viewers might have heard the name because he's went stateside now as well. He's a controversial figure, and I've made it clear what my views are on him. I believe he's a complete parasite, and what he does is he exploits troubled human beings for the sake of his fame and to get ratings for his sick show. So I do sometimes feel, when I think about what he's actually doing, I do feel that if I was in his presence, I would want to basically punch him. But then I think, well, this is the emotional response, because in the real world, if I was to do that, I would be, he would prosecute me for assault, and the media would portray it as thug attacks TV presenter. So the reality is that people who respond emotionally with violence, whatever the rights and wrongs of their argument, when someone uses violence, they are automatically then perceived to be in the wrong, especially if they instigate the violence. And it's hard to argue against that, because violence is an extreme thing. But at the same time, we shouldn't assume that words and actions are harmless. So the actions that somebody is taking, especially if they're in a position of authority, have implications on human lives. So in a sense, that is emotional violence. I believe that Jeremy Kyle is guilty of emotional violence. What he's guilty of is stirring up tensions between his guests. I've just seen clips from Jerry Springer. Now, I don't know if Jerry Springer's faked or not. I've heard a lot of people say that it is. But I'm just thinking, if any of that is real, that's just despicable. That this guy would just get his fame and fortune from basically stirring things up. And you know, the thing about a show like Jerry Springer is they get all sorts of radical individuals, like KKK members and you name it, just really radical fringe figures, clearly very troubled individuals. And it's almost like the modern day equivalent of a freak show, in the sense that they get these people on and say, oh, let's all laugh at them, let's cheer when they fight, and to me it's basically sick beyond belief. And I think that someone like Jerry Springer should be hounded mercilessly, scrutinised mercilessly by real journalists over what he is doing, but he's more or less got away with it. I mean, he's an intelligent man, and a very wealthy man, and someone who is in a position of power. And whatever excuses he makes, I can't see anything positive coming from that show. Even if it is faked. There's other shows, like I say, like Jeremy Kyle, that are not faked. But anyway, I don't want to focus on one particular issue. This is about anger management and how people deal with it. I mean, we know what happened after Ferguson was riots, and everyone condemned that, including myself. And that condemnation was entirely justified because innocent people were having their businesses burned. But the anger itself was understandable. The violence was crossing the line, especially since those idiots were targeting people who had nothing to do with Brown's murder. Brown's death, I should say. So, I think, you know, anger is a very, very powerful human emotion, very powerful. And when we have a sense in our brain that there is an injustice, or something is unfair, and we feel that we don't have a lot of power to change that with words, then sometimes violence seems like the solution. And yet, of course, it isn't. Now, if I was to attack somebody that I didn't like, I would be arrested for assault. And I can't argue against that, because if somebody who didn't like me done the same thing to me, I'd be pressing charges. So, what I want to raise in this video is how can we express anger? Now, when there are decisions being made that impact lives, I do think there should be a vacuum for public anger. I do think, whether that be political decisions or whether it be the police or anyone in a position of authority, I do think that part of free expression is the right to be angry and the right to express anger. So I don't believe in the argument that some make that everybody should sort of engage in a polite exchange of views. In an ideal world that would happen, but the truth is there are some views I find so despicable and so unjustified and wrong, I can't sort of I have to fight fire with fire. That's how I see it, because I've tried the approach of trying to make a reasonable argument, and there's some people there's no getting through to. They would probably argue the same thing. So I think there should be a scope for non-violent anger. You know, when we think about words like anger and hate, they are negative words, but what if the thing that you hate is injustice? What if the thing that makes you angry is other people suffering? In other words, it's what I call empathetic anger. It's not selfish anger. It's not like I want to be powerful and I will exert my power with anger. It's more like, this is wrong, innocent people are suffering, and I as a human being have a moral duty to be angry. Because I think anger comes partly from a small part of it might be selfish because we think, what if that happened to us? But another part of it is empathy with fellow human beings and thinking that that is wrong. That man or that woman or that child should not be going through that. This is why I get so angry on human rights abuses and when people make excuses for it. And you have this attitude everywhere. It's not unique to one country. So there isn't really any easy answer. Obviously violence cannot be the answer, because if you have a situation where everyone uses violence to solve problems, then you have anarchy. You have civil war, basically. So violence cannot be the answer, but I do believe in heated language. So if I candidly say that I believe Jeremy Kyle is an odious parasite, those are not pleasant words. That's not diplomatic, and it's not particularly mature, but it's my sincere view. For his part, he might turn around and say I'm some interfering little unknown guy that doesn't know what he's talking about, whatever. The point I'm making here is, I don't think anger is dealt with by suppressing it. There needs to be a vacuum for anger. Not through violence, but through passionate dissent. And passion might mean undiplomatic words. That's why I completely support the right of people to angrily protest. You know, when we always talk about peaceful protests, and it can be a little bit of a term that's thrown around. My thinking is peaceful protest basically means not looting, not burning, not violently attacking others. But I think almost anything else should be legitimate. I do think people have a right to say what they want, short of advocating violence. Now, that would be the one freedom of expression disclaimer, so to speak. So someone gets up and says let's all attack this individual person. That person is not only rabble-rousing but advocating physical violence. And when you have emotions boiling and people are angry, then that essentially is a little different from the actual physical act of violence. So that is the one free speech thing I would stop short of. Say for example, I said, I hate Jeremy Kyle, I want someone to assassinate him. Then if something like that happened, then would I be responsible? Not directly, but I would be inciting it. However, if I say I hate Jeremy Kyle, I think he's a despicable human being, that's legitimate, because I'm not advocating violence, but I'm giving a candid view of what I think he is. I'm just using that as an example, but there's many others. Anyway, let me know your thoughts. To what extent, this is the question I'm trying to get at, to what extent should a vacuum for anger be allowed? To what extent should we allow anger before it descends into something else? Because I think, and by the way, sometimes pacifists and some religious people, no disrespect to them, but they can be incredibly patronizing when they tell an angry person to love thy neighbour and to turn the other cheek and so on. I actually find that incredibly patronizing, because when someone has seen an injustice, there is nothing more, actually not only patronizing, downright insulting, than being told that you should love them, or you should forgive them, or there is a place for forgiveness, but not immediately after an injustice. So people who hold that view, well, if you practice it yourself, good for you, but you've no right to impose that sort of thinking on other people. People have a right to be angry about injustice, and if they express that anger through, frankly, hatred of a particular person, if it's legitimate from an injustice, then you've no right to tell them to love their neighbour and so on. So I would say that the pacifist approach, when it is sort of being imposed on other people, is very patronising. I mean, if I experienced gangs and I despised them, and if I lost my home, say if it was burned down by a gang or whatever, if a loved one of mine was killed by somebody, and then some pacifist or I don't know, somebody comes along and says, oh, you should forgive them, you will find inner peace by forgiving them, something like that. Even if it's true, it is profoundly insulting. You cannot impose that sort of moral positioning on someone else. People have to be given a vacuum for anger. So let me know your thoughts. To what extent should it be allowed, short of violence or incitement of violence?